Hello and welcome along to the industry analysis for the management case study of November 2020 and February 2021. And here we're going to be looking at the real-world construction toy industry. Now, before I get into the content of the presentation, I just want to take a moment to address a common question from CIMA students, and that is, why are we doing an industry analysis when you are already presented with industry background information in the pre-seen document itself? And I think that's a fair question. Before I answer that question directly, let me just say first of all that you are certainly not expected to be an industry expert by any stretch of the imagination. The CIMA examiners do not expect you to know everything there is to know about the real world industry. However, there are, I think, two good reasons why you should do a little bit more research on the industry than just what you're presented with in the pre-seen document. Understanding that wider business environment and industrial context has two key potential benefits on the day of the exam. First of all, it helps you to anticipate some of the potential issues that might arise in the unseen scenario and therefore avoid any nasty surprises or confusion on the day of the exam. So if you're more familiar with the real world industry, you have a better chance of anticipating or understanding the kinds of scenarios that are brought up on the day of the exam. After all, the CIMA examiners do use the real world industry as inspiration for the kinds of situations and scenarios that occur on the day of the exam. So they want the business scenarios that they create to be as realistic as possible, because the whole point of the case study exam is to test you on your ability to apply your theoretical knowledge in a realistic real world context. And so for that reason, of course, they're going to be looking to the real world industry to see what kinds of situations typically arise, or the situations that are likely to arise in the near future. Okay, so that's the first reason it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with the wider industry. The second reason is because it also makes it easier then for you to illustrate and apply your abstract theoretical knowledge by using concrete examples and specifics. Now, the primary source of being able to use practical, real world and specific examples is, of course, the pre-seen document itself. So the CIMA examiner expects you to use the information that you're presented with in the pre-seen document on exam day to support and illustrate your theoretical knowledge, your background knowledge, okay? But you can also use real-world industry examples to flesh that out a bit more. You might be able to use some examples from the real world in order to show your understanding of a particular topic, for example, from your objective studies. So for those two reasons, I think it's a good idea for us to do this extra exercise of looking into the real-world industry. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the structure of the presentation. We're going to start with a market overview, looking at some of the general trends in terms of a quantitative perspective, looking at the main figures and numbers, looking at market share in regions, and so on and so forth. Then in section 2, we'll move into a quick overview of the main product categories or segments. Section 3 then is the really important part. We're going to be looking at some of the recent trends and innovations in the construction toys industry. And then in the final section, section 4, we're going to focus on some real world companies, one of which I think is potentially the inspiration, or at least partly the inspiration, for the company Prybloxx that we're dealing with in the pre-seen document. Okay, so let's start with that market overview, looking at the construction toys market in terms of its size and growth in general. The global market for construction toys is estimated at $7.3 billion, I should say, US dollars in 2020. Now, just bear in mind, we're going to compare this to another segment, another industry, just for the sake of comparison, so that you understand what these absolute figures actually mean in relative terms. The market is projected to reach a revised size of $10.4 billion US dollars by 2027, growing at a compound annual growth rate of 5.1%. That revision came in light of the recent pandemic situation. So when you see revised in market reports, that means they've been revised in light of that development. The traditional blocks and plates segment, we're going to be talking about what the blocks and plates are in a moment, is anticipated to record a 5.4% compound annual growth rate. So you can see here that's just represented visually in this little diagram here in the traditional blocks and plates segment, which is the main component of the construction toys industry. It's expected to reach 4.1 billion by 2027. Okay. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does all of this mean? What does a compound annual growth rate of 5.4 mean? What does 7.3 billion US dollars mean in terms of market size? Well, let's compare it to another toy market, you could say. Okay, so this is obviously a market that is also targeted at children and young adults especially, and that is the video games market. So just to give you a comparison, you can see here in the center of this diagram, the total market value here is 152.1 billion US dollars. So let's compare that then to the construction toys industry. The market value there is 7.3 billion US dollars. So it's a fraction of the size of the video games market. So really, it is not a particularly large market, the construction toys segment, and they're up against it when it comes to competition with other sources of entertainment for children and young adults, especially the video games market. You can see there just how well diversified it is in terms of the media, places you can actually access video games. You have it on mobile, tablets, smartphones, PC browser games, console games, and so on and so forth. So there's a huge range of possibilities there as well, and it accounts for a very large market indeed. So let's return then to the construction toys industry, looking at a regional breakdown here. The United States valued at $2 billion US dollars in 2020 in the construction toys industry. It's the largest market globally still at 27.4% of the total share of the market globally. But China is obviously one to watch, as is the case in many other industries, and it exhibits the largest potential in terms of projected growth rates, 7.9% projected growth to 2027. And you can see here in the diagram above, 1.3 billion is the value of the China market in construction toys in 2020. So it's not far behind the United States in absolute terms. And given that growth rate, it's not going to be long until it actually catches up with the United States in terms of absolute value. Europe then, fairly slow market by comparison. Germany, to take an example, a representative example of European growth, we've got 3.2% compound annual growth rate for the construction toys industry to 2027. So again, relatively low, and in absolute terms as well, the European market is a relatively modest segment. So if you're looking at, for example, moving into a new market, if you're looking at market development options, China, obviously, Southeast Asia, but China especially, is perhaps the most obvious target. Now, the educational segment is perhaps the most important segment within the construction toys industry for reasons which we'll see as we move through today's analysis, but just in terms of also compound annual growth averages for the global industry, looking at 5.8%, which is marginally higher than the overall growth projected for construction toys. So USA, Canada, Japan, China and Europe will drive the growth estimated for the educational market segment. These regional markets account for a combined market size of $942.4 million, so a significant component or chunk of the overall construction toys market value. China will remain the fastest growing regional market also in the educational segment, as in the entire industry as well. And then Latin America will expand at a 6.9% compound annual growth rate for this educational segment. So that's quite healthy growth there in Latin America. But of course, you do have to bear in mind that Latin America is a relatively small market in terms of absolute market value. Okay, let's move on now to take a quick look at the main categories or segments in terms of products within the construction toys industry. So we have those traditional plates and blocks that was mentioned earlier. And these are, of course, the standard, the classics that we associate with construction toys and your typical Lego kit. You see the plates, which set the foundation, and then you have all of these different variations of blocks, block sizes, shapes, and colors. And that is the core of the construction toys industry. So you also get these huge boxes or packs of these classic traditional plates and blocks. Okay, that's your typical product when it comes to construction toys industry, and most of the major brands have these large packs or boxes of these traditional plates and blocks. Then you have these architecture kits, and these are monuments that can be constructed from different kinds of blocks, different kinds of construction toys, and they're usually based on famous world landmarks and monuments and buildings and so on. Often these are targeted at older children and indeed adults as well. Those who are interested in collectible items as well, for example, are interested in this architecture segment. Then we have what are called Tinker Toys, and this is kind of a tangent, okay? And this is actually a technology or design that's been patented by Hasbro, which is a major United States toy company. And they have this special Tinker Toy construction toy, and it has its own unique design. You can see it's quite distinct and different from the Lego concept, but they have patented this, so they have complete control over this market. Then we have educational toys. We talked about this educational segment. This comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes and variations in the construction toy industry. You get different kinds of educational toys, generally targeted at the younger children, okay, and then as it moves through into older children, you see more of a focus on the entertainment side and the hobbyist side. But the educational component very much driven by those youngest demographics. Then you have trains and motors or engineering, okay, so you see these Lego sets, for example, and they'll have engines and electrical components included in them, generally, again, targeted at older children and indeed at adult enthusiasts as well. Okay, so let's look now at some of the main industry trends and innovations, and this is where things get really interesting, and perhaps this is the most important component of the industry analysis from the perspective of trying to anticipate some of the potential scenarios that might crop up on the day of the exam. So we're seeing a big shift to online sales. That's no surprise. We're seeing that in many different industries and markets, and it's no different in the case of construction toys. We're seeing an accelerating shift. That's the important point. It's only getting faster. It's only gaining momentum to e-commerce and online orders of construction toys. The move towards online retailing translates into increased efforts, of course, then to build a strong brand online. So think about digital marketing, for example, and the potential importance of digital marketing for a company like Prybloxx in the pre-scene. Retail partners have stepped up in terms of digital sales and same-day pickup options, and consumers are inclined to grasp these opportunities. Now, of course, same-day pickup, that is something that has been inspired and spurred on, of course, by the progress of Amazon. Amazon has really upped the standards when it comes to delivery times, really short delivery times, and of course, that's putting pressure on other, especially smaller companies, to improve their logistics and delivery systems. Lego, in fact, has outsourced, several years ago, outsourced all of its logistics, delivery and storage, for example, to DHL, the major logistics company, international company. And since then, they've seen some really, really impressive progress when it comes to delivery times and things like that. So that's one potential option for companies, is to outsource their logistics to third parties in order to compete with those major companies like Amazon when it comes to increasing the expectations of consumers to get their products in a very quick way. At the same time, alongside online convenience, consumers are expecting more immersive brand experiences in store, and this is in large part down to Lego. Lego has led the way here when it comes to those immersive brand experiences, and we're just going to have a look now at a short video, which I think gives you a good sense of what exactly is involved in that sense of an immersive experience within a retail store. And I think there could be some important lessons drawn from this for a company like Prybloxx in the pre-scene.
Hey everyone, Joshua Hinland here outside the Leicester Square Lego store in London. This is the largest Lego store in the world, and it's 2 floors high. There's some awesome stuff to see and do inside. There's some really cool exclusives like t-shirts and some exclusive Leicester minifigs you can pick up. There's some recreations of London landmarks as you walk around inside the store. So really neat stuff to see and do. Let's go take a look inside.
So obviously Lego has a huge amount of capital and they're way ahead of other companies in this industry. And for that reason, of course, they have the luxury of investing a huge amount in these kinds of immersive brand experiences and retail outlets. So perhaps for a company like Prybloxx, it's a bit less realistic to go as far as Lego has gone in terms of these immersive brand experiences, but they can still learn some lessons, of course, from it. And of course, they're going to be keen to distinguish themselves from their closest rival in terms of Constro. Constro are obviously very close on their tail in terms of market share. And they may want to think about how can they distinguish themselves from Constro. And it may be that they look into something a bit more immersive like Lego has shown here in terms of investment in retail outlets, own brand retail outlets with some of these kinds of gimmicks involved as well. Now, digital play is obviously increasingly important for children. We're seeing children engaging more with screens, laptops, tablets, smartphones, consoles, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned earlier, of course, video games are a major industry when it comes to child entertainment, and all toys, construction toys included, of course, have to just confront and compete with that fact. Now, of course, there is another approach, and that is if you can't beat them, join them. In other words, you can look to incorporate some elements of digital play into the construction toys segment, and that is indeed what is increasingly happening. So as technology is expanding, consumer spending on video content, virtual reality products, and video game products have witnessed significant growth. As a result, construction toy producers are facing increased competition and are focusing on product development in order to digitalize physical play. So digitalization is increasingly a common buzzword in business in general. And indeed, you'll come across this in your CIMA studies as well, especially in the enterprise pillars. There's much more talk about digital technologies and digitalization. And indeed, digitalization of physical play now is becoming more commonplace. Companies are rapidly innovating their product lines or modifying them to reflect recent real-world developments and indeed popular culture as well. So I think this is something very much you should be thinking about in terms of your enterprise studies, in terms of E2 and indeed even E1 as well, where you came across data and information and indeed digital technologies and how those can be utilized in order to enhance value creation for modern businesses. Now, one very strong, very prominent example of this integration of digital play into construction toys is Lego's Boost series. And this is targeted primarily at ages 7 to 12, but you also get adults now increasingly using these, adult hobbyists using these and buying these kinds of products as well. So the Lego Boost set includes 5 potential robotic models that can be built from the pieces that are included with the set, with instructions available via a free downloadable app. Okay, in the application, it's recommended to be used on a tablet. The application also allows the models to be controlled remotely. Okay, so it has remote control facilities built into the application. Robots have built-in motion, noise, and light sensors as well. And there are also in-app games included, and they also, of course, generate user data and use rates. Now, again, from the perspective of your enterprise studies in the CIMA syllabus, 2019 syllabus, this is all very interesting and important. Think about, for example, the Internet of Things from your E1 studies, but also the data implications, both in terms of how you can use data to create and preserve value, and also thinking about it from a risk point of view, okay, potential threats. Think about cybersecurity, for example, and using user data to improve your product offerings and to more effectively target consumers and do marketing and so on. But all of that, of course, comes with its own potential downsides as well. Okay, so all of these are considerations that need to be taken into account. But increasingly in the real world, we're seeing this move into digital play, incorporating digital play, and integrating applications as well. And these are free downloadable apps. Okay, so there's little barriers to using these kinds of facilities. Now, of course, children using applications, many parents are concerned about children using, for example, tablets, smartphones, and so on, or using them excessively, especially, is an increasing concern from parents. So again, that would have to be addressed by companies like Lego, try to allay those concerns from parents. And of course, one of the main ways they do that is to emphasize the educational benefits. So we turn now to this emphasis and this increasing emphasis on the value of educational toys and how construction toys can be interpreted as an educational aid. So when we look at early childhood development, educational, interactive and multifunctional toys are increasing in popularity as families in developed markets choose to purchase them as a tool for childhood development. Parents, of course, are still the ones who are making purchasing decisions when it comes to children's toys, at least for the most part. Parents are still making the decisions, or at least they're permitting children to make certain decisions when it comes to purchasing toys. As budgets are expected to tighten in coming years, they're likely to choose toys that will engage their kids longer and in education or hands-on play, ideally. Okay, so if you're running tight on money and you're a parent and you're trying to think of making the most efficient purchasing decisions, what's more likely to happen is that you're going to try to find toys that have dual benefits or more than one benefit. Education, of course, when it comes to children, is one of those benefits. So if the toys have an educational component, then you're going to choose that over an alternative. Looking at it from a scientific perspective, there's some interesting study results that have been done when it comes to play and education and development. In a 2010 study, preschoolers who received vocabulary tutoring performed better on a vocabulary test when the tutoring was combined with a play program. So play when it comes to childhood education is absolutely valuable, very, very much well established in the scientific literature that play assists and enhances children's learning experiences in all sorts of ways. And although it sounds counterintuitive, pretend play actually helped kids better separate fantasy from reality, as was discovered in a 1977 study. So something like construction toys and Legos, these are very, very good at allowing children to explore fantasy worlds, because often these are themed kits with characters and certain kinds of devices or vehicles, and you have to construct them. And of course, this encourages pretend play to create your own little world and to live through that world. And it's been established by psychologists that this actually helps children to understand the difference between fantasy and reality. More learning while playing. The Genius of Play survey of 2,000 parents reveals 65% of parents are concerned about their children being behind due to the disruptions from 2019 to 2020 school year. And of course, that is a lot down to the COVID-19 crisis. This encourages a playful learning activities occurring at home. So of course, in that kind of a context, where you have this kind of a crisis, there's going to be an increasing demand for educational products being purchased by parents in order to ensure that their children are not falling behind. And if construction toys, again, can be marketed effectively in that way as facilitating childhood development, and as we see in the case of separating fantasy from reality, there's certainly a well-established literature on that, then it's likely that we're going to see construction toys pivot to this educational focus more and more.